Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Bryan Kohberger commissioned a study to see what people in Latah County think about him. That's the county where he is accused of murdering 4 college students and where he's set to go on trial next year. Now, according to Bryan Kohberger's brand new brief, the pressure to convict Bryan Kohberger is so severe in Latah County that here's what people told the people asking the survey questions. They said if Bryan Kohberger was not convicted, quote, they'd burn the courthouse down. Outrage would be a mild description. Quote, they would probably find him and, YouTube safe word, unalive him. Quote, there would likely be a riot and he wouldn't last long outside because someone would do the good old boy justice. Quote, enraged, strong opinions, firing of officers. Quote, riots, parents would take care of him. In short, he says, and this is a quote too, it is a mob mentality there in Latah County. He says he cannot get a fair trial there. He says the judge must move the trial in order for him to get a fair one. Now, tonight we're going to take a look at why Bryan Kohberger says the jury can't be fair and what the state says about it. Bryan Kohberger wants the case moved across the state to Boise, Idaho, which is a much larger town than Moscow, where 4 college students were found dead on November 13th, 2022. 3 women and a man who was dating one of the women were killed in the middle of the night. Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Santa Kernodle were rooming together, were housemates, and Ethan Chapin was visiting Xana Kernodle. Now, police say they caught the guy who did it. They say Bryan Kohberger, a graduate student at a nearby university, is the person who killed the 4 of them. Now, Bryan, of course, says he didn't do it, but now it's a witch hunt against him. That's what he says. He says it cannot possibly be fair to pull jurors from tiny Latah County, where the University of Idaho is located. It's been almost 8 months since Kohberger asked the court to switch the venue to the much bigger Boise, Idaho in Ada County. Now, the defense filed its final brief yesterday, and this all comes to a head at a hearing next week. Tonight, we're going to cover why Bryan Kohberger wants this move, why he wants what we call a change of venue, a change of the place where it will be tried, and why the state says there's no need to move it. And then we'll finish up by looking directly at the brief he filed just yesterday. So a special shout out to Libby Shipman, April Williams, Rita Young, Some Rando, and Mystic One, first 5 to make a comment in the chat tonight. And if you would, hit the like button and subscribe. Don't forget that right after tonight's live stream ends, we will be opening up the special members event that will be going afterwards. We are going to be playing legal trivia on some of the cases that we've done. So I'll make that live shortly after we finish this. It'll take me a few minutes. So let's talk first about Bryan Kohberger's reasons for wanting this change in venue, a change where his case will be tried. Back in June, Bryan Kohberger filed a 319-page pleading, counting exhibits, saying why he wanted it. We're going to go over that at a very broad level, just so you can understand what his arguments are. Now, let me add this to the stage and get to the right spot for you. Okay, so we're going to start with just sort of an overview. He says the motion is based on the 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, or the Idaho equivalent of those, which have different numbers. So essentially what he's saying is 5th Amendment, that he cannot be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. 6th Amendment, he has the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which, by the way, is not where he wants it tried. He doesn't want it in the district where the crime was committed. State, yes. 8th Amendment, he is protected against cruel and unusual punishments. And 14th, No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So Bryan Kohberger is not just saying, oh, I just want it because I think I have a better chance of winning. He is saying that constitutionally, he is entitled to move it, that he has the right to move it. It matters to whether or not he can get protection for a fair trial under the guarantees of the Constitution. So that's how big it is. All right. So, and I have some bad news for all of you out there. Once again, you are coming in for being called out because you watch YouTube and you're interested in true crime. So here we go. Immediately and consistently, the internet was abuzz with podcasts, tweets, Facebook groups, Reddit, YouTube, and TikTok postings. Once the police arrested Mr. Kohberger, the public was ready to and has proceeded to vilify him without regard to the constitutional guarantee of the presumption of innocence and a right to an impartial jury and fair trial. The media focus on Mr. Kohberger has been relentless and highly inflammatory. So I will say, I agree with them in many regards about that. The focus on this crime initially, it was very dramatic. It was sudden. It was in the middle of the night. It was against strangers. At least that's what the prosecution believes. And 4 people. It was very sensational. Then when Bryan Kohberger was fingered as the suspect and charged with the crime, definitely the media focus went on him. But the idea that simply YouTube, Facebook groups, TikTok postings, that those are responsible for the sensation, I think is unfair and inaccurate. But anyway, you've been called out for the second night in a row, because we also got that last night in the filing we talked about from Donna Adelson. So let's keep looking. The next section. Consequently, the question posed by a motion to change venue is whether a reasonable likelihood exists that pretrial publicity has affected the impartiality of prospective jurors. The phrase reasonable likelihood denotes a lesser standard of proof than more probable than not. So although he is talking about a constitutional right, he's saying, look, it shouldn't be all that hard for me to change the venue. It's just, is there a reasonable likelihood that the pretrial publicity affected the impartiality of the jurors who are about to show up and try me for murder? And it's not just a murder. It's not just a murder charge. This is actually a death penalty case as well. So, and he's saying, it's not, I just need to know that it's going to be fair. That's what he's arguing. The determination of whether to grant a motion for change of venue is addressed to the discretion of the trial court. What that means is the trial court gets to decide, and nobody's going to second guess the trial court. Now, in a death penalty case, especially, that's not exactly true, but it does mean that the appellate court is supposed to look at what the trial court has done and say, we're going to defer to the trial court. The trial court was sitting there, saw what was happening, and we're going to say that this was in the discretion of the court. So only if it was an abuse of discretion are we going to pull back on that. So, all right, let's keep reading. So that's who will decide. The trial court will make that decision. The State v. Kohberger is an extreme case in that the atmosphere of Latah County is utterly corrupted by press coverage requiring a change of venue. It certainly is the case that the atmosphere has been very volatile, that it has involved a lot of press and media coverage. But the question of whether or not it is Latah County specific is something the state is going to push back on. Now, the defense says the stories, the media stories that we're reading and that we've seen are often rife with misinformation and speculation. And there certainly are specific examples of things that have been out and that have circulated that it turns out were false. So let me stop for just a minute and say thank you to Deborah. I appreciate that. All right, so let's keep going through our document. Latah County residents have received the most media saturation within the state. Not really a surprise because it is where the crime occurred. Media coverage directly in Latah County makes up 36.13% of traceable media, considering that Latah County comprises only 2.75% of the entire population of Idaho, the oversaturation and resulting prejudice is magnified. So Bryan Kohberger is arguing that this traceable media is really focused on the place where he's about to be tried for murder. And that's not fair, he's saying. Now, the state is going to hone in on this traceable media because traceable media means something pretty specific. It means newspapers and television. And you could argue that that may not even be the primary way that people get information anymore, but it's certainly not the only way that people get information. And Kohberger's team says, well, we'll read more about it, but Kohberger's team is going to say, that's all we can fit. That's all we can even look at. I mean, if it's untraceable, if it's YouTube, if it's some other place, we don't have any way to access that. So all we can do is look at newspaper and television and assume that it's roughly the same. And the state's going to say this day and age, that doesn't make a lot of sense because most of the information is coming out in forums that go all over the world. All right, here are some absolutely fascinating statistics. Case recognition is 98% in Latah County. That's enormous. 70%, and it's especially enormous to me because there are a lot of students who would not have necessarily been there when these murders happen. They aren't necessarily from around there. They may have come from a significant distance to stay there. 70% of those recognizing the case have already formed an opinion regarding Mr. Kohberger. Their opinion is that he is guilty. The survey shows that of those that have the opinion Mr. Kohberger is guilty, 51% state they have a fixed opinion. That means there is nothing that will change their opinion. That has got to be absolutely terrifying for Bryan Kohberger and for his legal team. Now, I know that in general, most people would tend to think, based on what's out there, that Bryan Kohberger probably did it. But I want you to try to set that aside for just a second and think through this, because let's put it this way. If he did it, obviously he deserves punishment, right? But try to put that aside for a minute and think about this. Imagine that you are in prison completely innocent for some crime. I don't know, make it like a movie, some kind of movie. Somehow you ended up charged with this crime for absolutely no reason. And the survey shows that 51% of people say they have a fixed opinion that you are guilty and nothing will change that opinion. That's really significant. Now, that may be deserved here, but just imagine what that's like facing that. And so that he's arguing with that sort of intense belief against me, how am I going to get a fair trial? Now, the state is going to counter that by saying, if that's not just a problem in Latah County, people all over the country have seen the evidence against you and they've formed similar opinions. But we'll get to the state's opinion in just a minute. So comparison surveys were conducted in 3 other counties in Idaho. The comparative surveys, while showing high case recognition rates and similar prejudgment of guilt rates, have important differences of lower recognition of media items. The inaccurate media items have a high link in potential prejudgment opinions of guilt. Additionally, and we'll talk about this in just a second, additionally, comparative county surveys show a lower number of people following the case and have fewer personal connections. It is noteworthy that outside of Latah County, the incidence of fear associated with the case is significantly reduced. So what they're saying here is that these surveys, yeah, okay, people everywhere may know about the case, but there are some important differences. One is people outside Latah County aren't as afraid. It didn't feel as direct, like they themselves could be victims. So they aren't as afraid. It feels different for them. They also say that there are fewer people who have heard about some of the fake stories that are out there. And those fake stories, Bryan Kohberger's team says, are connected to whether or not you already believe he's guilty. If you have heard that he stalked the victims in advance, if you have heard, and nothing countered it, you heard that he did things to follow them and pursue them on social media, then that would make you think be more likely to have prejudged him and believe he must be guilty, especially if you didn't know that both sides now say those two things are not true. He did not do that. And then he says, Latah County, Idaho is a small, tightly knit community, population 41,000. Eligible population he means eligible for serving on the jury, is only 25,000 people. And you'll see a really interesting statistic in just a minute on the state side. Some of the major employers in the community are people connected to law enforcement and the University of Idaho. The university is the single largest employer in the community with at least 4,517 employees. So they're saying, start parsing this down. We've got at most 25,000 people to pick from. And then we've got special connections to some of those because somebody working for the university, given that these were university students, may have some preformed opinions. They may be more likely to have followed the story since there were 4 university students who were murdered. And therefore, it's going to be hard for that 4,500 to truly be on the jury. So they're saying, if you look at this is a small group to select from. This is kind of tough for us. Now, they say jurors sitting on a trial in Latah County will have no anonymity. And this is kind of an interesting point. I thought it was actually kind of a good point. What they're saying is, everybody knows everybody, or if they don't know you, they know somebody who knows you. They know families, they have connections because it is a small community. So they're saying, would you want to be on the jury that decided that Bryan Kohberger was not guilty? Would you want to be on the jury that decided Bryan Kohberger was guilty but did not get the death penalty? And the idea they're saying is these people have to go back out into the community, and they know the community thinks that Bryan Kohberger did it, and they may get some flack from the community. They may be afraid to go back into their community based on that. Let me say hi to A. Busby, and I am so glad you've been a member for 6 months. Thank you very much. We are glad to have you. We will be having our members event right after this. I'll be posting that just after we finish our live stream. So I'm sure I'll see A. Busby there. And if you're a member, I hope that you will join too. So let's keep reading through our document here. And that may be toward the end of what I had in this document. Okay. Now the defense is going to talk about why Ada County would be so much better for this case. Now, Ada County, interestingly, that's where the Daybell cases were tried. Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad Daybell were both tried in Boise in Ada County, Idaho. And they're going to say, look, they've done it. They've been there and done that. They know how to handle a very controversial, heavy media case like this. That it's the largest county in Idaho with more than 10 times as many potential jurors. The best chance, they're saying, to find an impartial jury is to have the largest potential pool of candidates. And they're saying, look at the courthouse. It can accommodate this trial. It can take in a large number of spectators. It has overflow space where video can be shown to people who can't come into the courtroom. It has multiple jury rooms. It has private restrooms where jurors don't have to come into contact with the public. It has the largest airport in the state. It's more cost effective for that reason. So those are all the arguments that the state is making. We'll pull this out. And those are the arguments that the state, that Bryan Kohberger is making for why he believes the court ought to move his trial out of the smaller community there in Latah County and move it over to Boise, the much larger city in Ada County, that it would be better, he would be more likely to get a fair trial. Well, the prosecution absolutely disagrees. They think that this is completely inappropriate. They believe that the case ought to be tried right there where the murder was committed. And that is the natural presumption. That's where cases have to be filed initially. So they're saying there's absolutely no reason, court, for you to move this somewhere else. We should have it right here where the murders happen. That's the normal thing to do. So let me add back to the stage what the prosecution has said. Now, unlike the defense, which remember they said, oh, that's a real low standard. It's not a very important standard. Well, what the prosecution says is this is really here are the two ways. Here's the standard. A court must change venue, required to change venue to another county if the court is satisfied that a fair and impartial trial cannot be had in the county where the case is pending. Now, second, a court may, that means doesn't have to, may, not required to, change venue for the convenience of the parties and in the interest of justice. So the state is going to say, look, okay, maybe it could be that there would be some kind of partiality, but there can still be a fair and impartial trial. They're going to argue that throughout here. There's still a way to get a fair jury in Latah County. And they're going to say, and it's not all that much more convenient. It's not in the interest of justice to move it. Keep it right here. So, and here's where they argue what I mentioned earlier. The report does not take into account data that is, let me make that bigger, that is not location specific at all. Given the ubiquity of blogs, podcasts, documentaries, and other internet or streaming media, it is difficult to gauge how including that data may have changed the true scope report that the defense used. Additionally, as the court is aware, this type of media, i.e. video bloggers on YouTube, true crime podcasts, true crime documentaries, and TikTok videos is often the most inflammatory and prejudicial because it lacks the professional standards and safeguards of traditional media outlets, newspapers, and television news. I don't necessarily disagree with what they're saying. It is certainly true that there is a much wider variety of opinion on the internet generally than you see in the newspapers, which tend to try to do the same thing I try to do here on the channel, which is be pretty even-handed, show you both sides, let you make and draw some conclusions from it instead of simply taking an opinion. The internet has opened up the ability to have both kinds of news. But I will say the prosecution has a good point here, which is if you don't track that, that's frankly where most people probably get information about the Kohberger case. They aren't only going to newspapers and television news. And so if you leave that out, you've left out a pretty important piece. And that important piece doesn't focus on Latah County. It goes all over. It goes all over the world, not just local and not just United States. The United States Supreme Court has held that only in the most extreme cases is a defendant afforded a presumption of prejudice based on pretrial publicity. Although I will say this, I highlighted this because I would call this an extreme case in terms of publicity. This one is truly extreme in terms of the amount of focus by the media and by social media on this case. It is very sensational, and a lot of people are tracking and following it. As the case law makes clear, the test is not knowledge of the case, but rather partiality. Thus, the fact that Latah County survey respondents had the highest percentage of knowledge about the case compared to other counties is far less significant than the fact that Latah County survey respondents had the least amount of overall prejudgment among the counties. So what they're saying is, look, this is not just, remember, when you pick a jury, it's not just a question of whether or not the juror has ever heard of the case. And if they have, they're off. That's it. Strike them. No, it's not whether they've heard of the case. It's whether they've pre-decided the case. Are they partial one way or the other? Are they leaning one way or the other based on what they've heard? And so they're saying it's not just knowledge. Look at whether there's partiality. The fact that someone knows about this isn't enough. So they're saying, court, you shouldn't just look at the fact that Latah County people knew about it. You should look at whether they actually have prejudged it. And the fact is they had less so than in other counties. And that's what you should be focused on. All right, let's keep reading. Thank you, Ms. Construe, for gifting 5 lawyerly memberships. Perfect timing since we got our members event right after this. Okay, so let's keep reading about, the survey data provided by Dr. Edelman is inadequate to justify a change of venue. It's not reported how many individuals declined to take the survey, raising serious concerns about non-response bias. Now, the state is arguing that not everybody answers. You know how it is when somebody calls up with a poll, say, I have survey questions, and you may say, no, I choose not to answer. And they may even say, I'm calling about a survey related to politics. And you say, they may have given you a little bit of information and you say, no, I don't want to answer. I'm going to hang up now. So they're saying, if you don't know how many people opted out, then you're missing an important piece of information. The state argues whether they opted out might actually be kind of important. The court must ask itself, would an individual who was asked for their opinion about an upcoming jury trial continue a survey if they had no opinions about any upcoming jury trials? And once the survey started, would a prudent, thoughtful, and conscientious person who is reluctant to pass judgment with limited information opine to a stranger whether they believe a criminally accused is guilty of murder? They're saying that people may be not answering by self-selecting out. The only people who answer are the ones who are like, ooh, yes, a survey. Absolutely. I want to tell you how I feel about Bryan Kohberger. And therefore, it looks more like people are prejudged. When, in fact, if you were to make it a little broader, you would realize that there are a lot of people saying, I'm not going to answer because they want to wait and hear the evidence. Those are the people who would show you the state is arguing they're not really as biased, and the whole jury pool is not as biased. Dr. Edelman's report focused primarily on Ada County as an alternative venue, despite the fact that Canyon County and Bannock County, the other two counties surveyed, both received astronomically less media coverage than Latah County or Ada County. So one of the things that the state argues throughout this is that there was a real attempt by Bryan Kohberger's team to sort of jiggle all of the stats they'd found, like compare Latah to Ada when it worked and Ada to some other county when it didn't work, and that's what the defense has done with its argument. So they argue that throughout here. Nowhere in the survey report is there mention of answers provided by Canyon County or Bannock County survey respondents about the two most potentially prejudicial and inflammatory pieces of media information addressed by the survey: rumors that defendant had stalked one of the victims or followed them on social media. Now, those were proven false, and the state has acknowledged it has not been able to confirm that he stalked one of the victims or followed them on social media. And here's another pretty big stat. 98% of Latah County respondents and 93% of Ada County respondents have heard of this case. But of those, 60% of Latah County respondents and 68% of Ada County respondents are inclined to believe that the defendant is guilty. So the state is making the argument, look, everybody thinks he's guilty. It isn't just Latah County. It's over there in Ada County as well. And it isn't just that the people who think he's guilty, the people who've heard of the case, they're everywhere. You're not going to fix this by moving to another county across the state. This is too big and too well known for that to really make a difference. And here they talk about the two questions. So 45% of Latah County residents responded yes when asked if they had read, seen, or heard that defendant followed one of the victims on social media. Only 35% of Ada County respondents reported having heard this information, but did not report on the responses from the other two counties. So they're saying, again, it isn't consistent what you're looking at, and therefore the court ought to look at this very closely and carefully. So the state also argues, look, we normally have a procedure for dealing with this. It's always an issue that a juror might be prejudiced or biased against the defendant. A juror might come in with a firm idea of what the verdict ought to be. And there's something we do to deal with that. We have voir dire or voir dire, depending on your part of the country. And what we do is ask questions, and we talk to the jurors to find out whether they fit in that category. And so the state argues, let's do that here. Decline defendant's invitation to disregard law and settled precedent establishing voir dire as the proper procedure for addressing bias. Let's just ask the jurors. Let's just find out. and you're going to see some stats they're going to do in just a minute. It will only be at the and this is an interesting argument. They argue that you can't decide whether or not you've got a press media bias in the community until you start voir dire. You've got to go ahead, get all the way to the point of trial, and then do it. We'll talk about that in just a second. It will only be at the commencement of voir dire that the court and the parties will be able to determine if any of the prospective jurors have formed an opinion based upon adverse pretrial publicity. Only then can a court determine whether the atmosphere of the court will be so utterly corrupted by press coverage that an unbiased jury cannot be found. Now, that's going to be a tough argument for the court to stomach, because what that is going to mean is everybody has to get completely ready for trial. Witnesses are ready. You are all the way to the point of picking the jury. This is the trial. Everyone's here. Everyone's ready to go. And then you decide, we really couldn't do it. It's just too hard. And I think that would not be the best way to do it. I think the court should make a call in advance. It just makes, I think, more sense. So I want to say hi to Jackie P., a member for 6 months. Thank you for being a member. And Jackie also gifted 5 lawyerly memberships. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. All right. So they are to, and this is the state's idea. Here's how let's do it. Let's keep it, the state says, in Latah County, but let's convene a large jury pool. Let's summon 1,800 jurors. That's amazing. That's more than they did in Murdoch. There are 25,000 eligible jurors, and 1,800 of them will be called in. Now, they say 1 in 100 would have to be chosen, so they may have it even smaller than 25,000. But that we'll also try questionnaires. We'll do detailed individual voir dire, asking the individuals questions. And they said, if worst comes to worst, let's do this. Let's impanel people from the neighboring county. It's a lot like us. They've got more people. Nez Perce County hasn't really been biased in the same way we have. Let's pull jurors from over there, which is pretty creative. I've not heard of that before, but interesting idea. So they've come up with all these ways that they think it can be made to work. Witnesses who are local would need to rent hotels, and they're going to talk now about why it may sound easy and convenient to go to Boise, but in reality, it won't be. And here are some reasons. That witnesses are going to have to get hotels. The state is going to have to deal with logistics of getting witnesses there, getting trial exhibits from where they are normally kept all the way over to Boise. They're going to have to relocate the lead attorneys as well as its support and victim services staff for weeks and likely months. This would come at great expense for lodging, transportation, and per diem. Additionally, the elected prosecutor and his chief deputy would be physically away from the daily operations of the Latah County Prosecutor's Office and from the law enforcement agencies they advise. And they point out most of the victims' immediate family members who are constitutionally entitled to attend trial proceedings live closer to Latah County than to Boise. Now, they say it's their understanding, so they may not know for sure. So, okay, that is now, you've heard the state's argument. We've talked about why the defense wants to move this case, why the prosecution says, no, let's don't do that. Let's keep it right where it is. Now I want to take a look at Kohberger's brand new brief and talk about some of the things he says in there, because there are some super interesting points that are made in there. Okay, so here's what he is going to argue. I'm going to make that a little bigger. That's hard for everybody to read. Now, remember what I'll wait on that. I'll start down here. So the amount of media coverage, I better make it a little smaller, in Latah County is the highest in the state, and it's not going away. It does not wane. As is pointed out by the state in footnote 1, found on page 2, publicity regarding Mr. Kohberger generating from YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, podcast, streaming services like Hulu and Netflix were not included in TruthScope's report. Those highly inflammatory and prejudicial and inaccurate media forms have reached Idaho citizens, but measuring them specific to location is not possible. They're saying, we would love to measure that. We could probably prove more there, but there's no way we have of accessing that information. Latah County, making up only 2.75% of Idaho's population, received 36% of the media coverage. Ada County, significantly less per person. They didn't give a number in there. Expanding the jury pool to the county next door is not a remedy because the residents of Lewiston and Nez Perce are in the same designated market area as Latah County. They've been exposed to the same excessive media coverage, have proximity, and share the same pressure to convict that exists in Latah County. Even the two counties combined do not even reach a third of the size of the available jury pool in Ada County. The residents of Nez Perce and next door county have been exposed to 36% of the total media coverage and are more than 10 times more likely to encounter coverage as compared to residents of Ada County. And remember what I read at the beginning when I said I went through the things that they did a survey, Bryan Kohberger's team did within Latah County, and said, what will happen if Bryan Kohberger is not convicted? And they'd burn the courthouse down, outrage. They would find him and kill him. There would be a riot. There would be enraged, strong opinions. Officers would be fired. There'd be riots. Parents would take care of him. They said, this is really different when you go outside Latah County. They said, here's what happened when we asked that same question in Ada County. They call this less emotional connection to the case. They said, okay, well, what would happen in your community if there was a verdict of not guilty? And they said, well, they would go on with life as always. I think they would take it well. I don't know if there would be super strong feelings. That's what the jury is for, to decide based on the evidence. If a jury finds him not guilty, then he wasn't guilty because they hear the evidence at the trial. I think they would accept it. So the defense is saying, look, this is really different. The level of intensity. Now, do know this, there probably were many comments more than that, and they pulled out particular ones to make a point. I don't know if the state would think it was fair that it across the board was very different or not. We don't have a response by the state. I want to point that out. They also talk about 3 capital cases in Idaho that recently had a venue change. We talked about Lori Vallow Daybell, Chad Daybell, and then another called Brian Drips. None of the cases presented extensive expert surveys, and none of these cases presented experts specializing in the science behind juror decision-making. So they're saying, look, judges moved these other cases and they didn't even present this evidence that we're showing you. We're showing you expert surveys. We're showing you proof. They didn't even do that, and still the judges moved their cases to Boise. Or at least I think all 3 were in Ada County. I know the Vallow, Daybell, and Daybell trials were. And they say such accommodations are not possible in Moscow. The facilities do not exist to accommodate a jury of 18 for 3 months in a case where the public and press will be lined up outside of the exterior of the building. The precedent of courts changing venue in Idaho and the experience of Ada County having handled high-profile cases should be followed and used in this case. Okay, so let's pull that out. We've been through the motions on either side, the briefs, I should say, on either side. Now, let's talk a little bit about what this is really about. Lawyers are often talk about something called forum shopping, where lawyers look for just the right place to file a case if they have a choice, and they try to get it in the place where they believe their client has the best chance of winning. And so a lot of people will say that's what Bryan Kohberger's team is doing here. Bryan Kohberger's team would say, no, it's much more basic than that. We just want a fair trial. And the state, there are some good reasons to move the case. One is it may be easier to find a jury. It's not 100% clear from what the state stats showed. There will definitely be more jurors to choose from, and that is important, and it does matter. There will be better facilities. It would be easier for the public to attend. Now, there are also some reasons that favor what the state wants to do, which is stay put, don't move the case. It would be very expensive to move the case and transport all the people and stay in hotels, and it's disruptive to the lives of all of the members of the district attorney's office who have to move. It's also disruptive for the offices back home if they lose people for an extended period of time because they have to go participate in the case, a significant number of hour drive away. And then, of course, there are the witnesses and family members who have to travel. So if you were to sort of boil it down, those would be some of the most important pros and cons. The prosecution has done a really good job, I think, of pointing out that there's not a definite positive connection with the fair trial and moving to Boise. It's going to be hard to get a fair trial no matter where because of the fact that there's so much pretrial publicity. But they're saying, on the other hand, I will say, on the other hand, this is a death penalty case. And the court really, in order to ensure that this never has to be done another time, should definitely bend over backwards to make sure that the defendant gets every chance at a fair trial. And it is probably not significantly likely to be a different result in Boise versus in Latah County. That'd just be my guess, is that whatever result comes out based on the evidence would probably be just that. All right, so let's go with some questions. Now, if you've got a question, go ahead and put that in the chat. And if you would put question marks at the beginning, really helps me spot it when I look through the chat. Blue Mermaid, a new member, welcome. We are so glad to have you. And that is in the nick of time, because as soon as we end the live stream, shortly after, I'm going to open up the members chat, that we're going to have a special members chat, and we are going to be we're going to be doing trivia. We're going to be doing legal trivia based on some of the cases we've covered, just for fun. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So definitely a great time. We have some gifted memberships from tonight. So the Mama Pinks and Marlon will put the wonderful moderators that we have will put in the chat. So how to get one of those free memberships. YouTube distributes them randomly, but you do have to turn on this little option where you can receive it. But you can always also hit the join button right beside the name of the channel. And so that's another way you can do it anytime, even if you don't get one of the gifted memberships. So, okay, heading over to see what we have over here in the way of questions. I need to back up a little bit. Okay. Aisha asking me, which jurisdiction foots the bill for a trial that's moved? Is that a factor? This one will be expensive. It will be expensive, especially because it's going to be so very long. It's going to be exceptionally expensive. And the jurisdiction, there aren't definite rules for this. I don't think that cut across the country, every place does it the same. I would think what would most likely happen is the counties would have some kind of agreement that if you move a case to our county, you need to foot the bill for that. So I would think they would have somebody in that who would send a bill of some type to that county. There might be other ways where they could agree to exchange something, but in a little county, they may not have a lot to offer to Boise. So there might also be some state funds that would be freed up, but I think it's going to be borne by the local jurisdiction in Latah County, and they're going to have to pay for all that transport. That's just a guess. I don't know for sure how exactly they would do it. But let's just note that they talked about how expensive it would be. So it's something they're thinking about, something they're worried about. Okay, looking for the question marks at the beginning. Drew P is asking me, has a witness list been created thus far? I've not seen a witness list. Typically, that would be a little bit later on. When you start getting into the pretrial and everything, when you finish discovery, then everybody will start making their witness list. They'll have exhibit lists, and they'll do the things to get ready for trial. Each side will notify the other, here are my witnesses, that sort of thing. Could we do a verdict panel? Maria Z asks. I am not sure what a verdict panel is. So put a little bit more about that in, and I'm curious what you mean. Annie K, do you think relocating the trial is essential to help prevent a successful appeal if the verdict is guilty? Annie K, I'll be honest, I think it would be wise. It's not that it's essential. It is discretionary in the judge's discretion. That it was a pretty good argument by the state. I think there is definitely going to be a problem no matter where this case is filed. I just think it would be smart to go ahead and move it where you've got more people coming in, and they're more likely, at least possibly, there are going to be more of them who haven't heard much about the case and don't know much. So I think it'd be safer. That's my opinion. Wendy Swain, Do you like plain ice cream or fruit or nuts? No fruit, no nuts. Absolutely not. Plain. Although I saw y'all were doing favorite ice creams. Publix Chocolate Trinity. Oh my word. Strongly, strongly recommend. Maynard Clark. Different kinds of DNA tests give varying results. Evidence of different results to avoid. And I think Maynard is talking about the fact that DNA is the most important piece of evidence that the state has in this case. And that is certainly the case. And there's been a lot of dispute over the DNA and what should be shown to Bryan Kohberger, what shouldn't be. And I think that's what Maynard is talking about. Okay, Mama Pinks has been a member for 6 months. So it is official. You can now be a member for 6 months. Thank you. And she points out that our para-league gals and para-league guys are amazing. So true. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate y'all tuning in and showing up night after night. It is a wonderful thing to get to do this. So thank you very much. All right, Maria Z. We asked the chat members what they think. Oh, guilt or not. So I know what you mean, Maria Z. That is super interesting. I always enjoy that too. I think I want to hold off, but I do want to ask this question. If you think that you've heard the arguments on both sides, there is going to be an oral argument, there'll be a hearing next week. But if you think the court should move the case over to Boise, over in Ada County, then put a 1 in the chat. If you think the court should go with what the prosecution wants, keep the case right there in Latah County where it is presently being tried. Put a 2 in the chat. So 1 means send it over to Ada County in Boise. 2 means keep it right there in Latah. I'll be curious what you say. So put that in the chat and we will get our informal poll right there. Michael, my favorite color, I like red and I like blue, and it's kind of hard to pick between the two. Rosie, how much money are we talking? I don't think they have put a figure on it. They probably don't want to think about it. And as far as a ballpark figure, I haven't seen that. I don't know of one that they've done. They didn't put it in their brief. Mama Pinks has gifted 5 lawyerly memberships. Thank you so much. And Carrie C is a new member. Appreciate that very much, Mama Pinks. Thank you to everybody who gifted some memberships tonight, just in time. I'm seeing 1s, 2s. Wow, I think we might be evenly divided. I wish I could do a poll here, but I can't do that on the streaming service I use. They have this thing, it's crazy, but you have to actually have like another device. It just is way too complicated. So anyway, I think y'all are split, but I think I started to call it and then a bunch of 2s came in. 1, 2, 3. ECH is a 3. Another option there. I don't even know what that is, but it'd be interesting. Maybe a 3rd county. Maybe there's another place to do it. I think it might be slightly on the 1, but y'all are split. Y'all are definitely split. So I think that's, I'm going to call it for the 1s, but say it was very split. I think it's very split. All right. Connie had a question. This will be our next to last question. Do you have any thoughts about the Scott Peterson case? My thought is that is really interesting. I've been listening to some back information about that and kind of follow. I did a couple of videos just sort of introducing it since it was going to be coming up now that we know that the Los Angeles Innocence Project has taken it on. So I wanted to know what are some of the facts. So check those out and you'll get some facts. But I've also been trying to learn more and more about it. I may well cover that coming up. It kind of is going to depend on how much comes out about that, how far it goes. It's definitely interesting. I see a lot of facts in both directions. So it will be very interesting to see whether the DNA does anything to help him or not. But let's see. Okay, so I'm looking for the question marks at the beginning, and we're going to do one more question. Tish, I tried to figure out that Ann Taylor said that it was necessary, why she said it was necessary to not plead guilty or not guilty. Is it possible even a little that's because they investigated because of mental illness. I don't think so. I don't think they're going to argue that, Tish. I don't think they're going to suggest that he had a mental illness or was incapacitated and can't stand trial. There's been no suggestion of that at any point, and they haven't asked that he be institutionalized. There's nothing like that that's happened. So I'm thinking there's not going to be any suggestion that there would be a claim that he isn't able to stand trial. Now, Idaho, we know from Lori Vallow Daybell's trial, does not have a not guilty by reason of insanity sort of possible verdict. But we know that from that trial. Well, don't forget, members, we are about to open up the live stream for the members trivia night that we are going to be having. That's going to be, I'll have it up in just probably 3-4 minutes. But meanwhile, I will see you all. I will probably go live again tomorrow night at 7, or I may drop a video in advance. There is so much to cover. It's just overwhelming how much there is to cover. And I will definitely see you live again Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern.